Hi, everyone. I think that this session or this recording might need a little bit of context. So, I met my ex-husband when I was 19, when we were both at Penn State University Park. And one of the first things that, not first things, but one of the things that we talked about as we were getting to know each other is he said, I lived in a tent in the middle of the woods during my middle school years. And I heard him, but I didn't believe him. Not really. In my naivete, I grew up in a house and in a community where people did have a house. There were different levels of poverty, but it wasn't something that I experienced on a daily basis. And so it's not that I thought he was lying because but I had cognitive dissonance in my brain where I didn't want to grapple with that. And so I just let it go. Like I just didn't even process it really. Um, until about a year and a half into us dating, he took me to this area up in the northwestern part of Pennsylvania, and we walked through the woods, and there was the remnants of a little shack, like probably as big as people's kitchens, maybe. Um, and he said that they lived in a tent, but children and youth had gotten called and they built a shack instead. And his mom worked a second shift. So his job at night was to keep the fire lit so that when she got home around 10 or sorry, 11, I guess, or 12 would be that shift, that she could find her way through the woods to their shack. So that was my first understanding of what it was like living in poverty, and not an understanding that I experienced it, but that somebody close to me had experienced that. And he would tell me stories about, living off of McDonald's because it was super cheap and wearing a jacket to school every day because it hid the fact that he was wearing the same t-shirt for multiple days in a row. Um, and I started getting interested in thinking about what does this look like in schools and what assumptions do we make as educators, and how does that manifest in the decisions that we make relating to students and families. And so I was in a meeting last night and we were talking about price points for something for students who qualified for free and reduced lunch. And somebody made a comment, well, I see how the parents come in Mercedes and Benzes and Teslas and these expensive cars, and I see their nails that are done. And I know that costs money. So I think we should increase the price. And I felt compelled to say something in a kind way because I think we've all had those assumptions before. But I thought, you know what? What if there's a family member who does nails and was practicing on them? Or what if it was a neighbor or a family member who drove them, the kids? Or what if they worked at a car dealership and were able to borrow a car? And I just think that sometimes we make decisions based on assumptions that we have in our brains, and we assume we know the story when we don't always. And I think we just need to pause and assess and recognize that we're making an assumption and that the assumption is based on probably a bias or some sort of socialization, television shows, movies, something that a trusted adult has said to us in the past, or maybe been an experience we've had where we've known a person who did that. But the research shows that the majority of people who are living in poverty aren't trying to get a one up on the system. They're trying to survive. And from what I've learned in my experience, protect themselves from other people knowing that. Um, I know that I had shown up in school teaching, wearing some designer clothes because my best friend didn't want them anymore. And she's like, do you want these? I'm going to donate them. And I'm like, yes, I will take them. And she had kids too who were a couple years older than my boys. So she gave me clothes for them. And so my kids were showing up in clothes that I couldn't afford, but that were given to us. And so we're thinking about phones. My ex and I divorced or separated when my youngest was in fifth grade, and he was going from house to house. And so I needed them to have a phone so that I could get in contact with him if I needed to. And so that became a priority for me to pay for a phone for him over other things that maybe were necessary at the time. But that was more important to me, his safety and being able to have a direct line of communication to him when one of us was not in contact. So I guess my wonder is this: how might we make different decisions if we had a recognition and an understanding of biases and assumptions that we make about other people, specifically students and families who are experiencing poverty? And if we become aware of these connections that we're making, we have an opportunity to really examine them and pull them apart, and to be curious and lean in more and find out the story, as opposed to the story that we're telling ourselves, which is something that Brene Brown talks about. So I'd love your thoughts, your comments. Feel free to respond back or to email me, Krista at residenceed.com. Thank you for listening.